I'm about to make Frogger in the Godot game engine. This will only be the second game that I've ever made after I made Pong in my last video. I originally made Pong because I thought I was going to do the 20 games challenge, which like the name suggests challenges you to make 20 games, with the goal being that with every game you make you learn more about game development and get a little better every time. I thought Pong was a great place to start, but when I started looking at the games listed for the second game in the challenge, I felt like they weren't actually adding a lot of extra complexity compared to the first game, so I decided to move forward to game 3, which is where I found Frogger. I felt like Frogger would add a significant amount of complexity compared to Pong, but it would still be a relatively simple game in the grand scheme of things. So that's why I decided to make Frogger for the second game I've ever made. All that being said, let's make a game. The first thing I had to figure out was how to make the background and all of the art for the world. As opposed to Pong, which was just a static background, Frogger has lots of different obstacles and elements in the game that are crucial parts of the gameplay. So for this, I had to figure out how tile maps and tile sets work. Fortunately, Bracky's Godot beginner tutorial, which I mentioned in my last video, had a section about this, so I was able to figure it out following his instructions. And I was also able to find a free tile set from Kenny.nl, which has a bunch of game assets that are free to use. And this tile set of road textures was pretty great and had almost everything I needed for all of the background tiles. The only thing that I couldn't find was a lily pad, which I needed because the whole goal of the game is to get your frogs to their lily pads. I could have just left an opening with like open water or something, but I thought it made a lot more sense to have a lily pad for them to land on. So I decided to make my own. I am by no means an artist, and when I started this whole journey of learning to make games, I knew I would have to figure out how to make some game assets at some point, but I was hoping I could get by with free assets I found online for at least the first few games. At this point, I don't even have any real art programs or anything installed that I could use to make game assets. But I do have MS Paint, so I booted up Paint and made an incredibly simplistic lily pad. It's not much, but it'll do the job. After making all the background, my next goal was to make a frog, because obviously you need a frog to play Frogger. Again, I was hoping to find a free asset of a frog sprite I could download somewhere, but I couldn't find one that I liked. So, just like with the lily pad, I decided that I would attempt to overcome my lack of artistic ability and make my own. Since I was going to have to make multiple frames in order to animate the frog though, I didn't think MS Paint was going to be enough for this job. So I did some research into tools for pixel art, and everyone seemed to universally agree that Sprite was the best tool available. It cost $20, but it was only a one-time fee instead of like a license or something, and since I will probably need to make more pixel art in the future as I continue my game development journey, I figured it was worth $20. I don't mind paying for software if the developers make a good product and they treat their community with respect. So after watching a couple intro tutorials, reading some documentation, and using many reference images, I was able to make what I think is a serviceable frog sprite. What do you think? How bad is it? Don't judge me too harshly. Like I said, I'm not an artist. Putting my insecurities about my artistic abilities aside, the next thing I needed was to add obstacles. So first I needed some car sprites. I looked at a bunch of different tile sets and assets that were available on itch.io until I finally found this one that had 30 different cars, and they were all with a top-down view and were perfect for what I needed. Once I had those sprites, I added hitboxes to them and added the scripting where my frog would die when it hit a car. So at this point, everything was going very smoothly. The next part is where things started to get a bit more difficult. Once I had all of the cars added, next I needed to add the obstacles for the river section. This included some logs and some turtles. And I also wanted to have some turtles that would sink underwater just as a little extra flavor. Again, I looked everywhere for some free game assets I could download, but I just couldn't find anything for either a log that looked like it was floating in water or a turtle. So I decided to once again try my best to be an artist. Honestly, I think they didn't turn out that bad. I think the logs could have definitely been better, but I was honestly pretty happy with the way the turtles turned out, especially the little animation for the sinking turtle. Again, it's very simplistic, but as someone who is not an artist, I was pretty happy with the result. But creating the assets wasn't even the hardest part. The hardest part of this whole project, and what took the most time and effort, was figuring out the logic for the frog colliding and moving with the platforms in the river section. I probably completely deleted and started over on this part at least 3 times. But after many hours and several failed attempts, I eventually got everything working, and I also added a new animation for the frog sinking in the river. Once that was done, I really just had a few finishing touches left, like adding some logic to detect when the frog lands on a lily pad, adding a UI with a lives counter, adding a main menu, and adding some sounds. Again, just like with Pong, I used some of the sounds from Bracky's platformer bundle. I thought about actually recording my own sound effects, and I probably will in a future project, but I thought the sounds from Bracky's bundle were good enough for this since it was just an educational project and not something meant for distribution. But I did upload this game to my itch.io page, so if anyone wants to play it or play the Pong game that I made in my last video, you can check it out at bt-arcade.itch.io, and I should also have it linked down below. I really enjoyed this project. Making this game was a significant upgrade in difficulty compared to making Pong, but I feel like I learned a lot during this process. I learned about using tile maps and tile sets, and the additional complexity of this game compared to Pong forced me to learn a lot more about how to use different nodes and scenes in Godot. And I was also forced to create some of my own art assets and learn how to use Sprite. I don't think I will ever be a great artist, but just like anything, the more I do something, the better I hope that I'll become. So who knows, maybe in a few months I'll actually be able to make some serviceable pixel art assets for a future project. Anyway, that's going to be it for this one. I'm not sure what my next game will be, but I'm going to try to continue adding some complexity and additional elements, so hopefully I can learn something new about game development with each project. So if you want to see more, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.